It's a Friday night. It's Larry K, your host. Logic and Larry is back for the fall season. Logic and Larry is back, ladies and gentlemen, for election season and for the latest news, current events, and everything else going on live from Newark, New Jersey. I'm lounging out listening to Sade, kicking it. Heineken in my hand, brain in my head, pensivity percolating, and you are with me tonight. I gaze out across the skyline. The Empire State Building is beautiful, a bright aglow white. Hudson Yards is a little bit purple with a percolating light. Newark is aglow. Broad Street is busy and bustling. Everything I say in this podcast is strictly my opinion as a private citizen and does not in any way reflect the opinion or position of any other entity or any other person. I'm speaking to you in my private capacity, and anything I say is not in official capacity whatsoever. I know we took a little bit of time off. I know we had to a little bit. It happens in the summer. I get a little distracted. And it happens. You know, I need the time off to recalibrate, reorient, recharge. And now I've done that. We have a great show for you tonight. Political Action Sean Bracken is going to be with us to break down some of these congressional races because, guys, this November, we are in for a very interesting race for the Senate, for the House. Will President Biden be able to get anything else done? Will the Senate go Republican, thwarting his legislative agenda? Will the House flip to the Republicans? What will happen? Well, Sean, Political Action Bracken, is going to tell us what will happen. He's been looking at all the races in key states, and he knows what's up, and he's going to be breaking it down for us later in the show. And expect Sean, Political Action Bracken, to be with us many times over the next several months as we head towards these midterm elections. I'm excited to talk to him. I'm excited to talk to you as we go through this. I hope everybody had a great end of summer. August is always a fun, relaxing month to me. You know, it's kind of like we know summer's coming to an end. We're going to enjoy it for everything it's worth. We're getting ready for football season, training camp, everything else. And we're going to just chill and enjoy ourselves, take vacation time, and kind of do nothing and skate until the fall. Now, fall is my favorite season by far. By far. And it's funny, in Jersey, like as soon as Labor Day weekend ended, it just automatically, which doesn't always happen, but it happened this year, it just automatically got like a little grayer, a little cooler, and a little damper. Got a little much needed rain, and I've been just chilling. Football season started. And by the way, shout outs to our listeners across the globe, across the country. Arizona, Texas checking in. Montenegro checking in. Saw some very nice wedding pictures. It looked very nice. You guys look very nice. So I know there's listeners across the globe right now, across the country right now. I don't want to welcome everybody to the show, to listening. But I was up in Boston last weekend. And Danny Deeds, what's up? I was up in Boston last weekend, and it was beautiful up there. I was in the North End, and there was great, you know, espresso martinis and good Italian food, and I loved it. It was very nice, and Rutgers got their first win. They're 1-0. So tomorrow I'm going to be in Piscataway, New Brunswick, for the Rutgers game. And I love this time of year, not only because of football season and because the weather got cooler, but because election season is upon us and because things get going again. Being somebody who was a student for so long, I kind of have learned to appreciate the recommencement of September when things get going again. The school year gets going again. The court year gets going again. Things get going again. And I'm kind of excited. And speaking of being a student for so long, I have $170,000 in debt. And Joe Biden, because he reduced everybody's debt by $10,000, and then if you got a Pell Grant, which means you were a low-income student when you were in college, he's going to reduce it another $10,000. I'm getting $20,000 off my student loans, which is nothing huge, but maybe it'll take, you know, $30, $40 off my monthly payment when it recommences in January. I can go for that. I'm okay with that. So we've had some things going on. Now let's get into the news. I want to get into the world news, and I want to get into the local news. I want to get into the Trump news. I want to get into all kinds of news, and then I want to bring Political Action Bracken on with me. So let's start off with the unfortunate passing of Queen Elizabeth of England. She reigned over England, if you can call it that. You know, after the Magna Carta, and after the way that England kind of developed into a democracy at some point. She's kind of a figurehead. But she passed. And, you know, it was sad, I guess. I mean, to me, whether you think it's sad or you don't care, it's just another indicator, another symbolic, you know, representation of the fact that the generations are changing. We are becoming, I hate to say it, guys, us 80s babies, millennials we're getting closer to middle age. Those who are middle age are getting closer to the senior class. They're going to get those vouchers for the restaurants. They're going to qualify for Medicaid not too long. And this is just one more signifier, just like all the unfortunate deaths as of recent. Ray Liotta, you know, James Caan. Now you see the Queen, she was reigning from, you know, the 50s until now. Saw so many things, she passed. There's a lot of different opinions on whether we should care, right? Like, do you care about the Queen? We're Americans, we don't care about the Queen, and Ireland hates the Queen, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, I always kind of, to be honest with you, I always kind of follow the royals a little. Like, I'm not against them. They're kind of interesting, like, I don't know. I don't hate him. I'm like, it's sad to see her go. I thought she was a dignified person. Like, whatever. So she passed. It's sad. The family made the trip. We got King Charles. King Charles, imagine that guy, right? He probably thought he was going to be king starting in like his 50s. He wound up starting in his 70s. So, you know, his son is ready to rock. I mean, he's probably going to become, knock on wood, hopefully, you know, King Charles does well. But, you know, he might become king in his 50s, so he might have a little bit of a longer reign if they even stay intact. There's a lot of talk that because she's passing, the royal family is falling out of fashion anyway, and we'll see how long it really even stays a thing, but that remains to be seen. On the international front, I told you I was not going to stop beating this drum. I will not stop beating this drum. Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive against Russia. Let me tell you something. Russia is getting their ass kicked. Now, Russia is committing war crimes. Russia is executing citizens in occupied territories. Russia is launching all-out, you know, military assaults on civilian strongholds. Nonetheless, Ukraine is fighting back. I will continue to speak and say that Ukraine and the war against Russia is the front of Western civilization. I will continue to say that. I will continue to report on this, and Ukraine has recently launched a counteroffensive in the southern region of Kherson, the southern region. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And they are continuing to make strides in the Kharkiv area. So not only has Ukraine successfully kept Russia out of their capital and out of the western region of the country, but Ukraine has now also launched a counteroffensive in recent hours. In the last day or so, they have launched a counteroffensive against Russia, and they are threatening to really give Moscow and have Moscow sustain heavy losses. That is a great thing for this country. That is a great thing for Western civilization. I can tell you that is happening right now. As we speak, that counteroffensive is probably raging, and Ukraine refuses to relent. And we continue to send them arms. I know there's some narrative out there, especially on the right for some reason, in the Trump world, Trumpy echo chamber, that sending Ukraine money is a bad idea. I disagree. We're sending them money and it's working, and I hope we continue to send them arms and money and missiles and guns and continue to assault Russia, because Putin needs to get his ass kicked and go right back to Moscow. In other unfortunate news, I will report on this because it's not necessarily garnering a lot of attention in the mainstream media. What else is new? This Ezekiel Kelly individual, another shooting that took place in the Memphis area. It started when the individual killed a long-term friend of his. We don't know why. He then live streamed on Facebook himself driving around and killing people. The second person he killed was a mother, a young woman. This individual was a once again, isolated socially male, out there causing havoc. This individual happened to be African American. I know there's a lot of nonsense out there in the narratives about race playing a factor in mass shooters. I have long said that race does not play a factor. What plays a factor is being a male. Gender plays a factor. Being an isolated male with easy access to guns. And this, I talked to you about it a while ago, this notoriety that they are now seeking, this internet social media validation for what they're doing is playing an integral role in facilitating and fostering and planting the seeds, sowing the seeds of these mass shooters. This individual has proven that because he's come out on Facebook Live. And has live streamed his shooting. So this is validation to that theory. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. Tonight's show is not about going into the solutions in various mass shooting issues. But we will go into it in future episodes, and I want to talk about it. That is just something I wanted to put on your radar because, again, because it doesn't have certain elements that might garner it or get it legs, it's not as widely being reported as other shootings have been. So I wanted to put it out there. Now, an interesting thing to kind of pivot into domestic politics, which is really, let's face it, the crux of this show in a lot of ways. How about Steve Bannon? Steve Bannon is already awaiting sentencing. And think about it. If it was a mass shooter that was a different, because I see CLR saying nothing. If it was a mass shooter that fit a different identity, a different demographic, then it might be out there, but it's not because it's not in vogue, right? And there was also only 4 people. I don't say that in jest, but I mean, that's part of the issue. But how about Steve Bannon? The guy is already awaiting sentencing that's going to occur in October on his contempt trial that he was convicted of. Now the New York District Attorney, who a lot of people had written off, the New York District Attorney, Vance, a lot of people wrote him off because he was no longer really pursuing the Donald Trump investigation. He had kind of allowed a plea in the Trump financial investigation, but Vance comes out. Not Vance. Vance is the old one, isn't he? I'm wrong. Vance is the old DA. But the Manhattan DA, the current Manhattan DA, I'm sorry. It's been a while since I've been on the mic. I'm a little bit sloppy, and I apologize for that. I'll find my groove again. I promise. Just listen to the jazz in the background and follow my voice, and we'll get there. But Bannon, yeah, Bragg. Thank you, CLR. Alvin Bragg. I'm sorry, Alvin Bragg. The new DA. Vance is the prior DA. The new DA, Alvin Bragg. He announced in recent days that Steve Bannon is being charged with fraud for the Build the Wall scam. What is the Build the Wall fund? Well, various individuals in Trump land had set up a fund, a fundraiser, if you will, soliciting from average Jimmies and Joes and Janes and Jane Does money to pay to finance privately a wall to wall off the U.S.-Mexican border. And they had solicited these funds from all these regular Trump people to pay for this wall. And individuals donated to this fund thinking that the money was going to go to finance this wall. But in reality, a ton of the money went to private individuals who misappropriated those funds to their own ends. And Steve Bannon, who is a prime individual associated with that organization, has now been charged by the Manhattan DA with fraud for misappropriation of those funds. And Rick says, shocking sarcasm. Yes, I mean, Steve Bannon is a scumbag, equivocating liar. But what else is new with people in the close social circle and political circle of Donald Trump? Of course he's an equivocating, fraudulent liar. What else is, what are we doing? What else is new? Is this a revelation? Nonetheless, it's nice that he's again getting indicted for something. He turned himself in, I think yesterday or this morning. And Steve Bannon, I mean, unless Trump gets reelected in 2024. Unless Trump gets reelected, it looks like Steve Bannon's going to be spending quite a bit of time in prison in the coming years, which is a good thing because Steve Bannon is a master of propaganda, equivocation, and political misinformation. So Steve Bannon is heading quickly toward prison. Unless his boy Donnie Trump can get elected and pardon him blatantly again, just by completely circumventing the legal system and justice, he's going to be spending a lot of time in prison. And speaking of the wall and immigration and Trumpism, has anybody been following this other story that has occurred this August, which I couldn't wait to get on the mic and talk to you guys about? And CLR has given me some info, so let me read it here. He said, because the jail anyway, Trump can pardon him to state charge. So if it's state charge, I don't know that Trump can do that, because it's going to be, if it's not federal, Trump can't do anything about it. So maybe this is a state charge. You're right, CLR. Good point. This is a state charge. I don't think Trump's going to be able to help Stevie. You think he might be going away in Manhattan? And yes, he has gone, if you haven't been following it, Steve Bannon has gone abroad kind of spreading this Trumpism thing, which is really just, it's not Trumpism per se. What it is 21st century rendition of fascism. This 21st century rendition of fascism, which has been deemed, dubbed Trumpism in the United States, has gone abroad, and it's, really prevalent in Hungary right now, actually. And Steve Bannon and other people from the right have really been pushing this in other countries, and it's taking root, which is kind of scary, honestly. And no, I have not seen the escalation of QAnon by Flynn, Rick, but I'm interested in it, so tell us about it. Has anybody followed this story that was going on all August, speaking of walls and immigrants and things, that the governor of Texas, and we got a Texas listener in here, so it's interesting, but the governor of Texas, Abbott, how he's been just taking busloads of migrants from Mexico and shipping them to New York City and to Washington, D.C., trying to make some grand statement about how the federal government is neglecting, abdicating its duty, and how the border states are not going to take it anymore, and they're going to start shipping just immigrants to New York and D.C. And what's interesting is from like a cultural, political, socio-political marketing standpoint, all these people who kind of have this hard line, tough on immigration, usually pro-Trump stance, are applauding this stuff and saying, yeah, I'm glad he's shipping people to New York. Texas doesn't have to deal with it all. I love that move. So much balls. Whatever. It's like, these are like legal petitioners for asylum who are awaiting court dates. And by shipping them all the way to New York, you're actually thwarting that process and making things a lot harder just for some nonsensical political symbolism. It just shows how absurd some of these Republican governors and some of these Southern people have been. And I see a Dallas person in the chat, Danny Deeds Lead, saying in big capital letters, Beto for Texas. So we see where some Texans have their sentiments. But it's just, it's ridiculous that people are cheering this on. To me, I kind of got angry and I was like, the South needs to be brought to heel. They lost the war. When are they going to, know their role? It's like, look, you're a border state. It's just what you are. By virtue of fighting for your independence from Mexico, primarily because you wanted to be a slave state, and Mexico was primarily outlawing slavery. Now, all of a sudden, you think you're going to dictate to New York and D.C. what how to handle immigration, when you've been dealing with that your entire existence, since most of the land that you currently reside on was taken from Mexican territory to begin with. So it's almost occupied territory, and now you're going to try to dictate to New York and D.C. what goes on? Like New York signed up for this? The beauty of it is, and the irony of it is, and the kind of finger in the eye to Abbott is, that New York has taken these people with open arms. Actually, they were well prepared. They have the finances. They are able to absorb them. They're ready and willing to accommodate these migrants. And they've done a good job of it. And Mayor Adams is saying, okay, we'll deal with it, but I'm going to call you out for what you're doing, Abbott. It's not, I'll take them because I'm a mature adult. And we did win the Civil War, so we know what we're doing, unlike you. But what are you doing? You can't just do this. And it just shows to me just like the sheer political juvenile tendencies and juvenile inclinations that are currently so prevalent in our modern politics, where these people are seeking, and people are so angry, right? Because they're like, and this is the same thing that happened during Trumpism, right? When Trump was president, when Trump was running, there was this sentiment. That all the immigrants who were being... You guys lost sound? So, that all the immigrants who we were discussing were illegal immigrants. When in reality, most of the immigrants we were discussing, especially those seeking asylum, were actually legal migrants, right? Actual legal petitioners for asylum. They were not illegal immigrants. They are applauding Abbott for shipping people to New York. Meanwhile, these mostly are legal applicants for asylum or for citizenship who have court dates. And by shipping them all the way up here, it's actually making it a lot tougher. And I apologize if people are having sound issues. Everything on my end is kind of going, so I'm trying. If anything's weird, I understand if you only have it in your left ear, I might actually know what that problem is. But, you know, I'm trying to refine this. So you see, like, the new layout and the new interface. I'm trying to kind of refine the whole interface we have and the whole presentation. So I apologize if there's any technical difficulties for any of the listeners out there. But we will get it, you know, perfected as we go. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting, you know, that Abbott sends all these people, it gets applauded, but most of these people are legal. They're seeking legal asylum. So applauding shipping them somewhere is just juvenile, nonsensical political gamesmanship and propaganda that I'm sick of seeing. But this is common in the modern era, and this is what we're going to continue to see. So I thought it was an interesting story to follow. You know. And thank you, Deedsy. I appreciate it. I'm going to work on that. So aside from the Abbott stuff and the Bannon stuff, we had the other huge news over the summer, over August, which was that there was a search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida residence. A search warrant was executed, and he came out saying that the FBI raided him illegitimately, and that, you know, they moved things around, they threw everything around, he was cooperating fully. Well, what we actually heard later was that Trump had given the National Archives certain classified confidential documents that the National Archives was entitled to. But he had not turned over all of the documents that he was supposed to turn over. And there was apparently a tip or some information that got to the FBI that basically said, look, Trump's jerking you around. Trump's saying that he's cooperating. He's saying that he's turning these documents over. But in reality, he's hiding documents at Mar-a-Lago. So the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago, and actually what happened? They found a bunch of documents that Trump hadn't turned over that he was supposed to turn over. So his nonsense story, Trump, about being raided even though he was cooperating is not true. It's not true. Trump was hiding documents. The FBI executed a search warrant because they were tired of playing games, and they recovered documents that should have been turned over. That should be a crime, I think, and I'm seeing people in the comments saying indict already. On that front, we know the Department of Justice is looking into the insurrection angle. They are also looking into violations of turning over the classified documents. And 11,000 government documents were found in his residence. 11,000 government documents. Just think about that. Think about how many documents that is. Think about it. Think about the fact that he's trying to tell his followers that they improperly rated his residence, that you have Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene out here saying that justice is being thwarted, that the country is turning into a fascist country. Meanwhile, the smoking gun is there. They recovered what they were looking for. It was criminal. There's nothing wrong with a judge signing a valid search warrant, executing that search warrant, recovering those documents. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And we see it. Now, indict already? Who knows what's going to happen, right? Because Georgia, they've been basically fighting... Basically, a lot of people that were subpoenaed to testify at grand jury, they've been fighting these subpoenas with motions to quash, and they've been fighting with people like Lindsey Graham and this one and that one. This Georgia inquiry is taking longer than I think a lot of people would like it to. And so while I still believe Trump's biggest legal hurdle and biggest legal threat is coming from Georgia, because they have the smoking gun where he was threatening the Secretary of State in Georgia, threatening him to get him to find the votes he needed to overturn the results in Georgia. And while the evidence is pretty clear in Georgia, and while Georgia seems like a place that's fertile for an indictment and conviction of Trump, it's still taking a while. And so those who think that's going to happen anytime soon, I'm just not sure that it's going to happen. It's just not happen. I'm not sure. And now we're seeing that, this Judge Cannon down there is kind of not following legal procedures. I have to be honest, I haven't read enough about it to give you an educated opinion, but I will for the next show, because I know there's been several rulings by the federal judge down there, by the state judge even, the judges down there regarding what the Atlanta, the Georgia DA can do, what they can't do in that investigation, and it's ongoing. But we don't have any new news on that, but it is ongoing, and we'll see. Will Trump be indicted anytime soon? I don't know. What I can tell you is that the insurrection, January 6 inquiries and prosecutions continue to proceed, and they have proceeded all summer. So we saw this summer, and I still kind of reported on some of it because I was live in July. I just took August off. The insurrection hearings were, I think, really undeniable. When you watch the hearings and the evidence was presented the way it was, I think it was really undeniable, the evidence presented the same way it was in the impeachment proceedings, that you can't really get around the facts and you can't really get around the truth. Donald Trump and his cronies, it looks like, definitely precipitated the events of January 6th, and I don't really think it's a question. Donald Trump and his allies purposefully fermented distrust in our free elections for their own selfish and personal reasons, and they are persisting with that to this day. So the hearings have continued. As I understand it, there's going to be more hearings this fall. We are going to see more evidence. We are going to see more evidence reiterated. Unfortunately, Liz Cheney, who's going to go down in history, in my opinion, as a true American patriot, who has kind of stood on the front lines of this whole thing and put her money where her mouth is and put country above party and country above her ability to get reelected. She lost her primary, and I saw people on the Trump Republican side saying, happy Liz Cheney loses day and haha, you lose. Like, if you're that much of a lackey for any one person, where you're rooting against somebody who's an objective, independent thinker and celebrating her losing just because she was disloyal to somebody that you are a lackey for, I would question whether you should still be carrying your patriot card. Because lack of objectivity and free thought and pledge of allegiance to an individual is the antithesis of being a patriot. It's the antithesis of being an American. So anybody who is celebrating Liz Cheney going down because she was disloyal to Trump should really question their values. And I question their values, quite frankly. But she lost. She will not return. But that committee is going to continue to hold hearings. And Rick says, not to mention the concentrated, organized attempts in Georgia and Michigan, caught on camera, allowing people in, including the group that did the third recount in Arizona, downloading voter info. Yeah, there's all kinds of things going on with regard to the attempts to thwart the certification of the election and attempts to thwart Joe Biden coming into office. It really is fascinating stuff. And when you delve into it, I think it's really undeniable what happened. But as those hearings continue, trials of the insurrectionists themselves continue. And I don't know if you followed, but one of the first people to actually go to trial who refused to take responsibility for his actions on January 6th was actually a former cop, Christopher Cooper, was convicted, and he recently got sentenced to 7 years and 3 months in federal prison for his role in the January 6th insurrection. And let me be clear, in the federal system, in the federal prison system, there is no parole. Parole is gone in the federal prison system. That means when you get sentenced to 7 years and 3 months, you are going to do 7 years and 3 months, minus some time on the back end for whatever credits you get. But you're going to do those 7 years. And he also has 3 additional years subsequent to his release of supervised release. So he's going to do 7 years of prison. He's already got 13 months in. So he's going to do, like, say, another 6 years of federal prison. And then he's going to have 3 years after that of supervised release, which is like probation. And if he screws that up, he could wind up going back to jail to serve the rest of those 3 years in custody. So at this point, that is continuing to go on. And part of the reason he got sentenced, the prosecution had recommended 8 years. He got 7 years and 3 months. So it was pretty close to the prosecution's recommendation. The reason for that was the judge cited his activities after the insurrection. He did not show remorse. In fact, he said he was ready to fight and willing to fight and die for a civil war in the name of Trump. Like, these are dangerous people, and these are dangerous times. When you pledge that type of allegiance to somebody who so blatantly tried to undermine our democracy, and when so many people pledge allegiance to somebody who so blatantly tried to undermine our democracy, you know that our democracy itself is under siege and is in trouble. I'm glad we are continuing these trials and we are continuing these hearings. And I think these midterms coming up, and we'll have Sean on soon to talk about some of the races. This is pivotal. This is important stuff. To say the very, very least, that's a vast understatement. But it is continuing, and it remains to be seen. And by the way, speaking of elections, and speaking of the 2020 election, and speaking of the upcoming midterms, Joe Biden, his approval rating has rebounded. Has anybody been paying attention to this? It's not by any means way up, but it's not anywhere near as low as it was after the Afghanistan fiasco and the gas price thing. Gas prices have come down. And as legislation, so Biden, I've been saying, Biden has not been a great promoter of his accomplishments. He has not been a great communicator of his positions and where and why he's coming from a certain position or perspective. And it's hurt him really badly in public perception. And it's caused his approval ratings to go down. However, they've rebounded as of recent. Has anybody paid attention to the fact that Joe Biden has, I was thinking the other day, despite his gaffes and his senior moments and people just making fun of him and some of his weird positions, and I disagree with plenty of Joe Biden's positions, I've told you that. Despite all that, the guy has passed some really significant legislation, and he's passed it on a bipartisan basis. And I would argue that he's passed more significant pieces of legislation than either Trump or Obama so far. I know Obama passed the first stimulus and then obviously the health care bill, which was huge and groundbreaking at the time, and I'm a huge fan of Obama. And I acknowledge that most of the reason that Obama was not able to pass much huge legislation is just because, especially after the first term, after health care, he put all his eggs in that basket. The Republican Party just decided that they were going to thwart and just, obstruct his agenda at every turn for no good reason for the next 6 years. So I'm not putting it on Obama as a politician in and of itself. But Joe Biden has, the infrastructure bill, and I've talked about it, so I'm not going to talk about it ad nauseum. I've talked about his tactical failures on that regarding, the Bernie bill versus that, and I'm not going to get into that. But what I will get into is he passed a massive infrastructure bill on a bipartisan basis, which Obama wanted to do, which Trump talked about that never even really tried to do because he's full of it, that we have needed for probably, 20, 30, 40 years. He got it done. There are shovels in the ground. They are rebuilding bridges. They are doing work on tunnels. They are rebuilding roads. There's money flowing. The infrastructure deal was huge. Then the man passes a gun bill that is not going to alleviate our problems with guns in this country, but is going to help with our gun problem in some way. At least they got to the table and did something on guns. He did that. He passed this massive, now along party lines, Joe Manchin wants to call it the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know if that's in the best headline or best title for this thing, but it's massive climate change legislation, massive economic redistribution in some ways, in a progressive way. He's gotten some serious things done quietly. And quietly, look out. Don't look too soon, but he's rebounding in his numbers. And the midterm outlook has changed pretty significantly to some extent, I would argue, specifically in the Senate. Now, when I bring Sean on, I haven't done my homework as far as the Senate and Congress, the House races, to really tell you that as a fact. But from what I've been hearing in the background, just kind of putting news out of my head a little bit, but paying attention because I can't stay away too long. It seems like it may change a little bit. We may have a different outlook of the midterms because Biden's approval rating is rebounding, and it should. The guy has quietly done what... There was always this issue, right? Did we elect him to be an ultra-progressive, or do we elect him to be a moderate and get things done? I voted for him to get things done and be a moderate. He's done that, right? He's got bipartisan legislation through. The CHIPS bill with putting more money towards technological innovation to compete with China. And by the way, China is losing a lot of economic steam because of the pandemic and other reasons. We are seeing jobs return to the U.S., while people might say, oh, I missed some mean tweets, could go for some mean tweets right now because gas was a little high, that's all they got. Oh, the guy's old. That's all the guy's old. Okay, he's old. He's old, okay? He's done some stuff, and I think the country is calmer, and the country's starting to look around and say, well, we're getting some stuff done. So just speaking of electoral politics, it's not like Biden's done a terrible job. And as Biden's profile gets better, and as Biden continues to accomplish things, and as more and more evidence comes out about Trump, and as Trump fades more and more and looks more and more like a kicking and screaming propagandist rather than an efficient, knowledgeable, powerful politician, I think the perception changes, and I think the political realignment continues to reorient itself in a different direction. I would watch out for a Ron DeSantis. I think the party's looking for Trumpism, i.e. this philosophical, quasi-fascist, dare I say, cultural conservatism, and I say that because it's certainly not economic conservatism, kind of like progressivism has lost its economic edge and become cultural. Conservatism has lost its economic edge and is becoming cultural. So I think this, when we say Trumpism, meaning this new cultural conservatism is alive and well, and Trump really did help push the party in that direction. I think he's falling out of favor as an individual to some extent. And I would think that people like DeSantis are trying to take the mantle. It remains to be seen how that's going to work. And it also remains to be seen. Without Trump, there's this vicious cult of personality with Donald Trump. A vicious cult of personality with Donald Trump. And I'm unsure, when you take the head off the beast, right? When you take Trump himself out of it, I'm curious about how strong the ideological, philosophical, political movement remains, right? Because I think a lot of people are just dedicated to Trump the individual for his shows, his entertainment, his cult of personality, as opposed to being dedicated to the philosophical and ideological underpinnings of what he stands for. Now, there is certainly a big contingent of people that are dedicated to the sociological, cultural, ideological underpinnings of Trumpism, because in a weird catch-22 feedback loop type of way, the people that are dedicated to those things are what gave rise to Trump in the first place and what allowed him to gain and garner power in the first place, right? On the other hand, he himself then propelled that even further with this cult of personality, with other elements like comedy and all this other nonsense that people gravitated to, celebrity, etc., etc. When you take him out of it, those ideological underpinnings may still remain, but how big of a contingent is that, right? How big of a critical mass is that? Is that a proportionality, sufficient to propel candidate after candidate in that philosophical, ideological, political space to be consistent contenders in our political discourse? I don't know. And I'm curious about it. But that remains to be seen. And I'm seeing comments in the chat saying, Biden shouldn't run. That's debatable, I mean, we'll see how he does the next 2 years. He is vastly old, and I think he lost a lot of steam these first 2 years. But let's see what the second 2 years, let's see what happens. Let's see who the Republican candidate, let's see. I think there are a lot of viable Democratic candidates. I've been long saying this, and I will stick to this. I think that part of the problem in this country right now is that with all the gerrymandering, there's this artificial perpetuation of parties that are irrelevant. Like the Conservative Party in the iteration that it currently exists, and when you take Trumpism into account, it complicates the analysis a little. It's a little more nuanced than that, but it's kind of outlived its purpose, but it perpetuates because of the gerrymandering and the judges and all these other things, and it starves out dialogue, meaning the Democrats then infight. And it's like, okay, if Biden doesn't run, who runs? Because there's this constant war between the progressives and the centrists, and then the common sense Republican problem solvers that are on Democrat and Republican side versus the Trumpism. But you only have two candidates. And, Alex Darlington, who was on the show recently, would say, well, we were sick of the two-party system. This is the problem with the two-party system. We have to go to, more parties. We have to put more parties in the forefront to challenge these systems. I understand it, but it's not going anywhere in the immediate future. So, while we say, do we want Biden to run, let's see what he does the next 2 years. Because as of now, he's the president. And if he's doing okay, or he's doing well, and we're passing legislation, and the progressives are somewhat satiated, and the moderates are satiated, and the common sense Republicans are somewhat satiated, and we can keep Trumpism at bay, and that's what they want to do as Democrats, maybe that they stick with Biden. Because it's just weird that the space on the left is weird right now. Because the progressives and the centrists are really not even, They're the same party in some ways, and they're really not the same party in a lot of other ways. And there's a lot of agreement, I think, between the centrists in terms of, policing and things on both sides of the aisle. And there's a lot of agreement in terms of like foreign trade, isolationism, and, economic resentment on the wings and fringes of the left and right that agree with each other. We're in a weird space, and because of this two-party system and the way that it's been, kind of falsely and artificially perpetuated up to this point, have thwarted our ability to have legitimate, elections about ideas. So I just wonder, if Biden was to step aside, would that create a weird void in the Democratic Party, so much infighting that it would, suppress enthusiasm? I don't know. And I don't know where we even go from here in our current political spectrum, because it is the way it is. But speaking of that too, speaking of the party kind of extending beyond its use and really going against the public, has anybody been following since Roe v. Wade was overturned? Has anybody been following since Roe v. Wade's been overturned the various abortion issues state by state? Because in a lot of states, it's not going the way evangelical Christians and the way that hardline, anti-choice conservatives have wanted it to go. The Supreme Court essentially paved the way and said it will be more of a legislative issue going forward. And legislatively, it's not all going the way the right thought it would go. South Carolina, of all places, this week. South Carolina, of all places, they had tried to pass a near total ban on abortion. Rape or incest abortions would still be allowed, but it would go from 20 weeks to 12 weeks. And there were a lot of other restrictions that made abortion near totally illegal in South Carolina. Guess what? The state Senate killed that bill. And you know who killed it in the state Senate? Republicans. Republican state senators in South Carolina joined all the Democrats and killed the anti-abortion bill in South Carolina. And then, if you haven't heard the news out of Michigan, the Michigan Supreme Court recently ruled that a ballot question will appear in the midterm election. And the ballot question is to codify reproductive rights. In Michigan, there's a ballot question that's going to go to the public that guarantees a person's right to reproductive freedom. It'll be in the Michigan Constitution. Despite a legislative ban in Michigan, they will have a constitutional amendment that will guarantee a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to reproductive freedom. And I'm pretty sure, looking at the breakdowns, that it's going to pass in Michigan. So despite this legislative agenda, this Federalist Society agenda, this right-wing evangelical Republican agenda that's been pushed for so long, where they were so confident that if they got the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, that they would basically make abortion a thing of the past. Despite their efforts, the people are rising, the people are speaking, the people will not be silenced, and the people don't agree with anti-choice. The majority of this country is pro-choice. The majority of this country is pro-choice. And it's coming to fruition. We are seeing it, even in states where you thought abortion would be a thing completely gone. People are waking up and saying, I don't want abortion to be completely illegal. What are we doing? And that's all the more proof of what I've been saying, that the current iteration of cultural conservatism in this country is outliving its welcome. It's outliving its purpose. It's outliving its use. Intriguingly, this blue-collar resentment of the elite and this other culture war of wokeism and this and that is more relevant. And actually, there's semblances of it on the moderate left as well, where they're rejecting it. And it is a shame that this two-party system is kind of suppressing our ability to breathe and discuss these things in a more honest way. But if we have to do it through ballot initiatives in Michigan and Republican senators in South Carolina, rather than having the courts protect rights, then so be it. Then so be it. But it's interesting to see. Very interesting to see. Now, what I'm going to do is step aside for a minute. And when I come back, enjoy the music. I'm going to be gone like a minute tops. When I come back, I'm going to bring on Political Action Sean Bracken, man. We're going to talk about these midterms. We're going to break down some of these races. We're going to break down the key races. We're going to see what's going on. We're going to see where the real outlook is. How is Biden's second 2 years going to turn out? What is the outlook for Biden's second half of his term? Is he going to have a Democratic Senate? Or is he going to be fighting against a Republican Congress in both houses? We will see what the outlook is in these early stages of September as soon as I get back. Stand by. I'll be right back with Political Action Sean Bracken. And I'm back already. See, it wasn't too long, was it? Yeah, you guys are funny. Funny guys. Yeah, I'm waiting on Political Action Sean Bracken to give me a call. And we are going to roll. Let me just see some. All right. Up the music. Sean Bracken.
Hello, Larry. How are you today?
What's going on, my brother?
Not too much. It's been a while since we've talked.
I know it's been quite a while, man, but it's great to have you back on. And I always told you that, you know, I think the listeners got so much out of our, you know, prior thing we were doing the 2020 election that you would be back 100% and that we would be discussing the midterms, man. So here we are, and I know you've been following this stuff, and the listeners are excited about it, and I think we're going to be doing this the entire election season, man. So it's great to have you back. And by the way, I saw you launched like a whole branding now, Political Action Sean Bracken on Facebook, everywhere else. Tell us a little bit about that before we get into the midterm discussion.
Sure. I did launch a Facebook page, which I have shared. I mean, I did a lot of revamping just with social media in general, but that was one of the things I did is I created that page, and it's brand new. Okay, so and I mean literally brand new. It's maybe a week old at most, and I just launched it today, and I just created a YouTube channel, and that was literally just like 2 days ago.
Awesome.
Which I still haven't posted anything on there yet, but I want to use that as like a video platform. I ran into like a lot of different politicos on YouTube, one of which is a fellow by the name of Let's Talk Elections. He does like a lot of like videos where you see like all of his maps and all of his content like that, and I thought, hey, why can't I do that? And I sort of started thinking about that, and I thought that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, and that's what I did. And I created that Facebook page, which will be mostly the same, a lot of video content. I'm also just posting a lot of just random posts, just writing different posts, and then eventually I would like to create a digital newsletter for it. So I have a lot of plans for this.
I'm excited about this, and I've told you I'm excited about this, and any collaboration or thing I can do to kind of help boost your channel, I 100% certainly will do, and we'll share the link to your YouTube and to your Facebook in the Logic and Larry group and the page and my personal page when we're off tonight. We'll do it this week. So I'm excited about all that, bro. I really am. And I think people can get a lot of different political knowledge and a good take from you. So I'm excited that you've launched that. I really am.
Yep, but again, I am too, and I'm excited for what it could do. Again, it's just brand new, so I guess the big challenge now is to just get the word out about it, and especially after I revamped my social media account and started brand new with that too. So I have, like I said, I had to do that, so I'm starting kind of like brand new period. So, I mean, that will be the biggest challenge, just to get the word out. But, I mean, yeah, any help you can do, and obviously I'll be doing a lot myself to try to boost the page as much as I can.
Sounds good, brother. It really does. So Sean, let's jump into this, man. I'll be honest with you. You're going to be educating me a lot tonight. Not that you don't normally, you do, but like I haven't been paying attention nearly as much as you have. So this is kind of my crash course to get me geared up for the election season. I think it's probably a lot of listeners' crash course to get them geared up for the election season. I'll kind of let you kind of elaborate wherever you want, and if you have certain points you wanted to touch on, feel free to jump into them. I'll just ask you kind of, I have certain questions, and then I'll kind of see where you're going. Overall, first of all, before we get into specifics and specific races and specific states, and Tom Wolford actually just asked the question I was going to ask you. What is the outlook in terms of the House and the Senate? Is there any chance in the House? Is the House a foregone conclusion? Is the Senate like where the Democrats want to hold ground? I mean, what's the overall macro outlook on both houses right now?
All right. Well, as of now, I mean, this is what I have, and obviously I haven't like made like full predictions like on some states and like some races. So right now, both the Senate and the House, nobody has a full advantage on control, which
wow,
I think is rather shocking.
Me too.
And I can give you like the specific numbers. The Senate right now I have is a 49-48 Democratic advantage. And I have Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia as like the three like coin flip states, which I'm sure we will get into a lot more.
Definitely.
As we go. But those basically will determine it. Will probably determine the Senate. But again, I mean, if I had to stay with the Senate, I would say I would slightly like the Democrats' odds in the Senate. Although I have seen like some of the polls tighten in some of these states recently, but I do like the advantage that the Democrats have in the Senate. As for the House, I have it as a 214 Republican to 204 Democratic with 17 toss-ups. So, and I find that very surprising, that number, because the Republicans are supposed to do very well in this election. Like, it's an off-year election.
Right.
President Biden is in office as the Democrat, and you have the Democrats running the show in Congress, even granted very slight majorities, but they're still in power in both chambers. So the Republicans in normal years would be crushing it, or vice versa if it was all Republicans like it was in 2018 in the fatigue of Donald Trump starting to wear in. And this year it's just not happening. And that's just kind of, I'm kind of baffled by it. I'm not going to be surprised because, again, I mean, this should be easily a red wave year, easily.
Right.
And it's just not right now. It's basically a coin flip. Again, like what I said in the Senate, I'll say only for the flip side, I would say I do slightly favor the Republicans to take the House, but I'm not seeing a red wave, and I'm not predicting a red wave like I was a year ago. I said red wave, foregone conclusion, it's going to be a bloodbath for the Democrats. And it now just fast forward a year later, you have the Roe v. Wade getting overturned. Biden is improving in his approval ratings, which you did reference in your show earlier, which definitely is helping, I think. And then also, too, just the fact Donald Trump is out there, and then he's selecting, especially in the Senate, like he's selecting a lot of really poor candidates to run. And, I mean, definitely here in Pennsylvania, which will probably be another race we'll talk about. it's just a total disaster that the Republican Party, I mean, especially like the voters and just the party in general, allowed Trump's nominees to be chosen because they're really dragging the Republican Party down, in my opinion, here in the state.
So let me ask you this too, Sean. You kind of already answered some of my next question, but are you seeing this, kind of lack of a red wave? Is this coinciding with any, is this Roe v. Wade? Is this Biden rebounding? Is this any legislation? Is this just a result of the specific districts and this suburban versus rural divide we saw in 2020 that just hasn't budged? What is the reason we're not seeing a red wave? Because I thought the same as you a year ago. Why are we not seeing a red wave?
That's a very good question, because, I mean, I'll even throw this number out at you before I do answer the question. Basically, if you look at Biden's average approval rating, while it has gone up, it's still around 43% if you round up on real clear politics. Mm-hmm. And he's about -11, -12 in the hole. And I hope, and I'm sure that number would sound familiar, because that's exactly kind of in the area where Trump was in 2018, when the Democrats had the big blue wave that basically swept in a lot of Democrats that year. So if you just look on that, like, no-brainer, Republicans win. Like, that's just a no-brainer.
Right.
But to answer your question, I absolutely 100% think that Dobbs was the biggest contributor to the change in fortune, because it was after that point, and there is some data that'll back it up, that even like your special elections you've been seeing, like in Congress, Democrats have been vastly overperforming Biden's margins in these districts ever since the Dobbs ruling took place.
Makes sense.
Before that, the Republicans were overperforming, but then Dobbs happened, and then all of a sudden, look, now the Democrats are overperforming. Then they win New York 19 in the special election, which a lot of people thought could go Republican in a red wave year. And then Alaska at large, even though there's some other outlining factors there, but that just went Democratic after the ranked choice voting.
Yes, ranked choice.
And that was just a total surprise.
Sean, that wasn't Palin involved in that?
What's that?
Wasn't Sarah Palin involved in that ranked choice thing in Alaska?
Right, she was. And, I mean, Alaska is a special case just because Palin and the other Republican in the race, Begich, they were fighting. They were, like, in a feud, and they kind of split the votes and allowed the Democrat to win that way. So that might not be totally indicative of everything else we're seeing across the country, but, I mean, just to see Alaska at large flip, and that seat's been Republican for like 50 years.
Wow.
I mean,
it's just... that doesn't happen in a red wave. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't happen in a red wave, nor does the New York 19. So it's those two already, as like, early indicators, are not indicating a red wave by any stretch. So it makes sense. It's intriguing to say the least, man. It really is. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, because I was just gonna finish and say that because of the Dobbs ruling, all of a sudden now voter intensity is about even, and that's another indication that it just doesn't look like a red wave. Just if you look at those numbers,
makes sense. Now let me ask you. So let's. So you both seem like toss-ups. Your gut at this early juncture, I'm not holding you to predictions now, kind of gives you Democrats, a push in the Senate and Republicans a push in the House. Let's talk about the Senate, man, because I think a lot of people, there's less races, there's more we could focus on. You mentioned 3 states. Break down those 3 states. First, tell me why those are the deciding ones, just an overarching reason why those states are the deciding ones, and then get into those 3 states and what you're seeing about the candidates, the trends. Break them down.
Okay, so now again, I chose Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia. It's kind of like my 3 toss-up states. Now, I mean, each state is obviously different as to why, but in the last election in 2020, like all these three states were very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like these, well, I mean, not Wisconsin. I mean, Pennsylvania took days to decide, but Wisconsin was only 20,000 votes
Mm-hmm.
in 2020, and it was only about 20,000 votes in 2016.
Right.
So Wisconsin is looking like a 20,000 vote state. So either way, and it just really all depends on who turns out more and gets their 20,000 more people out.
Right.
Because it's just that evenly divided.
Right.
And that's why I chose Wisconsin. And it really, again, just it really comes down there to the Milwaukee like suburban area, and right now it's just you look at the candidates. You have Medela Barnes, the lieutenant governor there, and then you have Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this race and what makes it a toss-up is Ron Johnson has had a lot of slip-ups.
Okay.
With comments and now he's involved in a fake electors scandal up there, which basically was going to try to overturn the will of the people in 2020. So he doesn't look really popular right now. And again, he made a couple of comments that were kind of that definitely expressed them out to scrutiny. So he's getting scrutinized for his comments.
Right.
And therefore, like, he's kind of sunk.
Right.
And right now he is trailing in the polls. But I do think this race, just because Ron Johnson is the incumbent and Wisconsin is so evenly divided, I do expect this race to close up. And that's why I have it as a toss-up state. But Barnes right now is in the lead, and Marquette had him up by 7. Fox News had him up by 4. So I mean, he does have a lead right now in Wisconsin. You'd rather be Barnes,
right? And so they're putting in the comments too that he flip-flopped on Social Security and stuff. So he's had some gaffes, like you said. And then I think, it was a razor-thin margin with the presidential election too. That's how Wisconsin is. I'm gonna ask you this. I've been reading articles about like Wisconsin voting laws and things and trying to restrict early voting and drop boxes. I think I already know the answer, but would you say that some of that might factor in come election day too? This is going to be a close race.
It definitely can factor in. Now, Wisconsin is a divided state because you have a Democratic governor who's also in a very tight race of his own, and then you've got a Republican legislator. So, but even just the threat of all this stuff could definitely intimidate some voters, and it could, possibly, depending on like how close this really does get, it could definitely swing the race Republican depending on like how much of this stuff really sticks in people's minds, and especially people that are more fearful of these kind of different voter laws that the Republicans are trying to enact. That could definitely play a factor
Makes
in
sense.
Race.
Makes sense.
Especially in a race as close as that.
Okay, so for right now, the Democrat said they're leading and Johnson's fading a little, but you think it's going to tighten up, so we'll have to touch base again on that race throughout the fall. Right.
Yeah. That would be how I put it. Right now, again, if you'd have to push me, I'd say Barnes. Where it definitely has the advantage, just because, again, like your one viewer said, the flip-flop on Social Security and then the fake electors scandal. That's two definitely big issues there where he's kind of hurt himself. But, again, like you'd rather be Barnes right now, but I do think it'll narrow up.
Wow, really interesting. Okay, so then let's talk about the other states you talked about. The other two deciding ones.
Now, Georgia, this race, I just think it's very close because you've seen, the runoff elections last year were very close, although Warnock won by like 2%, I believe. But it was still very close. Georgia usually still I mean, it's history, even recent history, it's still a Republican DNA there.
Right.
It's going to come down to that Atlanta area, like that Atlanta bubble, basically, where you had all those blue counties. It's really going to come down to that, and especially Cobb County and Gwinnett County, two suburban counties around Atlanta, very important counties in the state. And it just really depends if they can get that same kind of turnout as they did in 2020.
Right.
And it was very clear. So remember, Biden only won Georgia by what? Like, he didn't win it by a whole lot.
No, so he didn't. It was razor thin. I forget the number. Somebody in the chat probably will know the number, but it was, I think, in the teens of thousands or even in the single-digit thousands. Yeah. It was not a lot. Do you think – see, here's another interesting question, and you may – I think you know the answer. You've been studying this stuff a lot. I mean, there may not be – like, can Warnock get the turnout? We don't know. But on the Republican side, like, is there a vehement push to – isn't he running against Walker?
He's running against Herschel Walker.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know that. I mean, you answered the question for me, and we got the thing. It's 11,000 is what Biden won by in Georgia. Razor thin, kind of right in the middle of the yeah, kind of right in the middle of the teens and the ones like we were saying. But is there a vehement like enthusiasm push from the Republicans with Walker? He's hasn't really come across great from what I've seen. Kind of has looked silly. Like, is that turnout like it's not? Warnock has to turn out people, but the Republicans do too. Are there any indications of like an enthusiasm gap, or is it just totally a toss-up with that too? Like in Georgia, who's going to have the bigger turnout? Like I don't know that Republicans are so vehement either with Walker. You tell me.
And that really is a huge question, and maybe a question my friend down in Georgia named Sean can answer.
Yeah, Sean's a great guy.
Yeah, oh yeah, because he lives down there. So it's really, really hard to say. But there has been, again, like Herschel Walker has had his missteps. Another Trump-endorsed candidate. And he's had several missteps. I mean, I can't even list all the missteps he's had. Like, he has not been a good candidate for them. Because otherwise, I would say Warnock would probably lose this year.
Right.
If they nominated somebody normal,
right?
If the Republicans, but Herschel Walker is making this a race just because he's just so out there, and some of his comments are out there, and it's keeping Warnock within the margin of error. But the polls are still within the margin of error, and even despite all the missteps, there are a couple of the polls lately have actually showed Herschel Walker has pulled out. Ahead by a couple of points.
Wow.
So he's leading by a couple of points. I mean, it's still kind of within the margin of error, so it's basically a tie. But, I mean, it's remarkable that a candidate as much as Herschel Walker, in the way he's gapped, in the fact he's still within the margin of error. Like Georgia, it just shows that Georgia is a very tough state for Democrats still to win.
Right.
And a couple of other things about Georgia real fast is that you do have to hit 50% first of all on election day to win, or there's a runoff.
Wow. Okay.
And it looks like right now Georgia is actually heading to a runoff just based on like the numbers, because they're both kind of in the mid 40s, maybe slightly getting into the upper 40s. So if they don't hit 50, that's a runoff. And if it does get to a runoff, you'd rather be Walker than Warnock, if you ask me, because of the way Georgia is, and usually turnout drops in the runoff election. Usually, although last time was another case because Trump basically said that he was defrauded or whatever, and then his voters just didn't vote there, which ended up helping the Democrats, I think, but.
Right.
But usually, like, it goes the other way. The Democrats vote on the actual election day, but then on the runoff, their numbers drop. So, I mean, so Warnock needs to win this outright on election night, or he's going to be in some trouble.
And you just answered my question, because that was my next question: who would benefit from a runoff? You just answered it.
Right.
And that makes sense. So now you said the third state was Nevada. Let's talk about Nevada. So, and by the way, hold on. So you said you'd rather be Barnes than Johnson in Wisconsin. Who would you rather be in Georgia right now?
Right now, probably Herschel Walker.
Okay.
Probably, I would say. I would, even though he has screwed up as much as he has with his comments, he still looks like right now he's like within the margin of error, and that you have to feel good about that.
Right.
Despite all the gaffes and missteps he's had, I mean, and the fact he's still kind of right there.
Right.
A couple of points up, couple of points down. I'd rather be Walker, I think.
Gotcha. Okay, now Nevada, that's the one you said, right? Let's talk about that.
Right. Now, Nevada's close, and Nevada, again, is another state where I'm sure a lot of people won't remember this, but the Democratic Party kind of split after the 2020 election there, and I don't even remember all the details, but basically the more moderate wing of the party and some of like Bernie Sanders like activists, like that party did have a split, and within like I think the Nevada Democratic Party, and it definitely hurt the party there a little bit. I think that's just my take, but again too, it's just Nevada's just close as it is.
Right.
Just because, I mean, 2020 election, it was very close in Nevada, very close. It's actually a lot closer than people realize, even though Biden did win it significantly enough to where there couldn't be any doubt as to the outcome. But it still was close enough, and it took a lot of days to count the votes, especially out of Las Vegas. Las Vegas really made the difference for Joe Biden in that election, but it was because it was razor thin. It was like I think it was like 1% or 2%. It was definitely a close state, and I think it will be a close state again. All the polls are indicating it. And again, I think there are some issues too. I think with COVID, during COVID, with the governor of Nevada, and when he tried to do some lockdowns in Las Vegas's economy, basically it was a casino business. So I think people are discontent with the Democrats there, but even still, like the polls I'm seeing right now is Cortez Masto, the Democratic candidate, is still a couple of points ahead, and that's kind of why I say the Senate overall, like you'd still like the Democrats' chances because she does lead that race. I feel like, and another thing to remember too about Nevada is it seems like the pollsters just always underrepresent the Democrats in that state. The Democrats always overperform expectations in Nevada. So will they again? I mean, after some of the things that have happened there the last couple of years, I don't know. But I mean, you still have to feel good. I mean, the dynamics of Nevada, I mean, you have to feel pretty good about it if you're part of the Democratic Party. I would think, even though I think it's still going to be very, very close.
It's almost like the opposite of what you said about Georgia, just like the internal, history and the dynamics in place just favor Democrats, and so you got to be confident. So there, you'd probably rather be the Democrat, you're saying.
Right, and it's been that way since basically 2008. That's when Nevada voted for Obama. That's when it flipped from its Republican voting tradition, and then went Democrat, and it just really never looked back. I mean, again, candidate selection definitely didn't help. I know the Democrats are using the abortion issue in Nevada. I know Adam Lexalt, the Republican candidate, he took some positions that were pretty hard-lined on abortion. So, I mean, you would think in Las Vegas and Reno and places like that, I mean, that potential campaign could be effective.
Right. And again, that just brings home that abortion thing again, like you referenced earlier, especially in places like that where you're already leaning Democrat, you kind of just solidify it when people are focused on that issue, the abortion issue. So, Sean, tell me this too, because, and again, like I said, as much of a political junkie and as astute and educated as I am, I just haven't been following as well as I should. Right now we have a 50-50 split in the Senate. Tell us about some of the overall, like, other contested races that are up for grabs. Like, you've obviously highlighted those three, but just from a, kind of a generalized sense, why does it come down to those three? I mean, does it look like it's going to be another 50-50 split? Does it look like the Democrats are going to gain a seat? Somebody's going to lose a seat? I mean, I'm trying to understand those three states within the context of everything that's up for grabs and understand, because right now we're at 50-50, and that's because of Georgia and Warnock. But obviously you have Wisconsin's currently Republican incumbent. If that flips, and so I guess if Georgia goes Republican to Walker, but Wisconsin flips, then that offsets. If Nevada stays Democrat, then it offsets. But, like, just kind of help us understand the Senate in the whole context of all the races up for grabs and kind of what's going on in that sense. You got Pennsylvania, you got is Arizona up right now? I think it is, right? Like you got these you got these other states. So just give us the context. We know those are your three to watch, and we're going to continue to hone in on those as the election goes on, unless you change it at some point this fall. But give us, like, those three states in the greater context in general. Tom's asking about Ohio in the chat. Like, just tell us about some of the other states, and just the grand context. I'm trying to understand the math.
Well, and again, right now, too, and you brought up Pennsylvania, and I will touch on Ohio, too, but Pennsylvania I have as a pickup right now as a lean. I mean, it's a lean for Fetterman, although I do think the races in Pennsylvania are closer than they probably should be, and probably are closer than people would think. But, I mean, it just quickly on my state of Pennsylvania, I think we're probably sitting at about a 5-point race.
Okay.
For both the Senate race and then also for our governor race.
Okay.
Even though, especially the candidate for governor, a terrible choice, may I say, the Republican candidate for governor here, just a terrible choice for the Republican Party. But I still think, I mean, he's kind of in the ballpark. My concern, I mean, both with Dr. Oz, obviously running for Senate, and Doug Mastriano, the Republican candidate for governor, is can they win the Philly suburbs? Right. And can they win Erie County, which is the big star county on my county map of Pennsylvania. And right now, I mean, based on what I've heard out of Erie County, they're behind there. And I just don't think a candidate like Doug Mastriano and some of the positions he's taken and a lot of the scandals that have come out about him is going to play well in the Philly suburbs. Right. And that's why I have Pennsylvania as like a pickup. So as of now, like, that actually tilts the playing field more towards the Democrats. Right. With the 51-49 advantage. Now, Ohio is interesting, too, because, again, so we're actually divide this up here. Mike DeWine, who's the incumbent governor there in Ohio, he's going to win, and he's probably going to win going away as the Republican governor. Pretty normal mainstream Republican. Right. That, I mean, again, I mean, he had to deal with the COVID-19 mess too, and a lot of people are overall satisfied with his job performance in a state that seems to have tilted Republican since Donald Trump. But then you have the Senate race where you have J.D. Vance, who wrote that book called Hillbilly Elegy, and there's a lot of content in that book that could be used against him in a state like Ohio, especially some more rural parts of Ohio, and just basically just Ohio itself, really, if you think about it. Right. I just basically talks down amongst them. And then, just like Dr. Oz, carpetbagging in from New Jersey, he came in from Silicon Valley, in like that California area. So there's a lot to go after him on. And again, another candidate selection that's really hurting the Republican Party, because that should be no-brainer, just red, just locked. Right. And it's not, I mean, again, I'd rather be Vance right now just because the tilt in of Republicans in Ohio has become what it has become. So you'd still rather be J.D. Vance than Tim Ryan. But again, that's another state where the Republicans had to spend a lot of money in because J.D. Vance was vastly underperforming what the Republicans should be doing there, and a lot of Republicans are nervous that in special circumstances that Tim Ryan can flip that seat because of the candidate J.D. Vance is. So I mean that's a very interesting state in and of itself as well. Although,
Right.
again, I still see it as like a lean Republican state.
What's the
for
polling?
Senate.
What's the polling showing over there with the Senate race?
Well, there hasn't been too much, and
Okay.
that's kind of what kind of stinks, because I am wondering kind of what it actually does look like there. Some internal polling showed that Ryan was ahead. Other polling, like from Emerson College, has shown it to be like a 3-point J.D. Vance race. But even then, like that poll, it was like 45-42, which showed there was a lot of undecideds.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean,
right.
that's kind of, I mean, I don't like undecided or polls with a lot of undecideds, but I mean, that's basically all we have to really go on right now is the Emerson College poll, which is basically a 3-point race. So and again, J.D. Vance is vastly underperforming because he should be up by more if he was a good candidate selection.
Right, and so we might see a pickup in Pennsylvania. And I was going to ask you about Erie County only because I remember you using that as kind of a bellwether in the presidential election. So I've paid attention to that because of you. I know you're a Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area guy, so I was curious about that too. So you already answered that question. And if Pennsylvania's a pickup, then even if, say, Georgia was a loss, I mean, it kind of keeps Democrats in there. And then if Wisconsin is kind of up for grabs, it's interesting. And who knows with Ohio? I think it does still lean Republican. I'm with you on that, but you never know. Any other states that are really of note? I mean, is Arizona kind of a Democrat senator state at this point? I know Rick's an Arizonan, a Phoenix guy in here right now, but I mean, is there any other states that are of note that we're going to see a loss or a flip, a pickup, a win? Anything else we should be paying attention to?
Right now, so Arizona is an interesting state too, but I'm just going to say that again, selection matters, and the selection of the Republican candidate for the Senate there was not a good choice, and now we find ourselves in a situation where a lot of the polling right now shows it's like a 4 to 6 point Mark Kelly race because of the choice that the Republicans made. So I would be very surprised if Mark Kelly lost in Arizona, but it is still one I'm keeping an eye on just because Arizona also is a razor-thin margin last time.
Right.
But that was a very, I mean, you can even ask Rick too, very unacceptable choice that the Republicans made in that primary. McMaster's has taken many positions that are very hard-line MAGA, and I just don't think it's going to play well in Arizona, and especially now that your generic ballot is roughly even. So it probably helps someone like Mark Kelly stay ahead in that race. Another race I am a little bit keeping an eye on is New Hampshire. I don't think they had the Republican primary yet, but it looks like, again, the Republicans could choose somebody that is unacceptable to the electorate, and that could help Maggie Hassan there. Again, I even so, like, I'm not expecting New Hampshire to flip, but it's one just to always watch. New Hampshire is just kind of one of those states where you just don't know, but it has been trending Democratic as well. And then also too, like I also just wanted to bring up Florida real fast. I just wanted to, because there has been a lot of polling this week that's shown like the Senate race is pretty tight there. I think a lot of polls showed it 2 to 3 points. Keep in mind, Florida with the polling is basically Nevada in reverse.
Right.
So
Right.
I feel like Republicans are underrepresented in the Florida polling, so I wouldn't expect Marco Rubio to lose that race. I still have that as lean to likely Republican, but I am keeping an eye on it to see kind of what happens, but it's just not likely to see that flip. And then North Carolina, too, is another state to watch. Another attractive candidate for the Democrats, Beasley. She's been running neck and neck in a lot of polling, Republican and Democratic-leaning polling. They have it basically as a coin flip. So I'm going to be curious to see if the Democrats are energized to vote, if that actually could be a seat the Democrats could get really close in. But again, North Carolina, I mean, you've seen what it did in 2020, what it did before. I mean, it just looks like a Republican state for the most part. I mean, it has elected a couple of Democrats statewide, but it's mostly a Republican state.
Gotcha.
So,
right.
But again, if intensity is really high for the Democrats,
so you never know.
Could get very close there. Yep, could get very close there.
And by the way, you obviously know what the hell you're talking about, which we already know because Rick, while you were talking about Arizona, just said Mark Kelly should win, and then while you were speaking, put in caps, yes, exclamation point. So you obviously hit the nail on the head in Arizona and knew what you were talking about, which we already know. But just to let you know, Rick agrees, and he's on the ground there. So that all makes sense. Now let's just briefly, because we're going to obviously touch base. Since we only do the show every other week, I mean, we'll probably have you on pretty frequently this fall, and we might even have to have a special episode here and there where it's just you and I talking without my monologue, but we'll talk about that. But before we kind of, wait till the next appearance, touch on the House a little bit, like, any races that are to watch, what are you seeing? Why, why is it a toss-up all of a sudden? And, just what in the House should we be looking at? What in the House are you looking at? What are your kind of bellwether indicators in the House? And, when we talk to you again this fall, what are you looking at that's going to determine your outlook on the House?
Okay, now for the House, I mean, it's a little bit more tricky because there's like so many toss-ups out there that we could focus on. But I am gonna bring up a couple of seats. First of all, Virginia 7. With Abigail Spanberger. That seat is a toss-up that the Cook Political Report actually moved to the lean Democratic column.
Okay.
But I am going to be taking a look at that race because that is a suburban/exurban vote. So if the Democrats are doing well, we will know early. Or if the Republicans are doing well, we will know early based on that House race just because of that suburban-exurban split.
Right.
So it really will depend on who votes in that race. If Spanberger's winning, that could be a sign of a good night for the Democrats since Virginia closes its polls at 7. That's like one of the first poll closings in the country. So that's like your early indication right there where we probably will know quite a bit of information like early on because there isn't really many other swing districts like in any of the other early poll closing states. So that's like the one like I'm like really keeping a close eye on. And then also in Pennsylvania too, I'm just curious in Pennsylvania, and again, just because maybe I live here, but I am curious, again, I do think that Pennsylvania will narrow up even more statewide to like a 2 to 4 point race, probably. I mean, Pennsylvania is a lot more purple than a lot of people think now. It is definitely narrowed up in terms of Democrats and Republicans. Republicans made a lot of ground in voter registration. So I am curious with like that information, if Matt Cartwright and Susan Wild can keep their races in eastern Pennsylvania and the Lehigh Valley. Those are two swing districts. Susan Wild represents the Allentown area, and then Matt Cartwright represents the Scranton area. And we've been talking a lot about those areas that have kind of swung back and forth between like Trump and Biden and like Obama, like all three of those candidates. So those could be really close districts. And
Right.
those are districts that were very, very close in the last election. Susan Wild's district actually went for Trump by a point.
Right.
And Matt Cartwright actually went to Trump by a few points. So if turnout's good, like if both sides are energized, I mean, that could help Susan Wild and Matt Cartwright keep their seats in a year that they probably should lose their seats. And then also, too, what impact will the candidacies of Dr. Oz and Doug Mastriano have on those congressional races, if any at all? That remains to be seen. Will there be split ticket voting in Pennsylvania, or will it be, or will those candidacies really drag down the Republican candidates and even potentially put Pennsylvania 1 up for grabs, which is Brian Fitzpatrick? But again, Brian Fitzpatrick there is a different kind of Republican, because he seems to know how to handle himself in Bucks County. So, I mean, he should win, but you just wonder if Oz and Mastriano tank,
right,
like, and go the other way, which is downward instead of narrow. You just wonder what kind of drag could be, like, on some of those House races. And it just, that could be an indication, too, with some of these other states and these other congressional races where there's some poor Republican candidate choices where that could potentially hurt Republicans down ballot.
Makes sense. That definitely makes sense too. So there's some bellwethers you're looking for. Do you know what part of Virginia that's Virginia 7 is? You said it's suburban, exurban. Is that like Richmond, or is that Northern Virginia? Do we know?
It's Northern Virginia. So it's,
okay.
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it's like North Virginia, and it kind of goes a little bit more into a little bit of North Central Virginia. So it's kind of like that kind of district.
Right.
Again, a lot of exurban vote out of D.C., which is kind of like outside of D.C., kind of getting more closer into the rural areas. And then you have the suburban area, which is around D.C. I mean, that's like a huge race for me, just because, again, I think right there you're going to know if it's a red wave, a red ripple, or basically a wash.
Right.
Just based on that result. I think if she's winning, that could be a good sign for Democrats early as we head into the night with some of these House races, that they might not lose a lot of seats. The one other thing I would just point out though with the House is, because of a lot of these states and how they drew their maps, I mean, it's still, I mean, especially if both sides are equally as excited to vote, you could, I mean, that's why I do lean the House Republican.
Right.
Because I do think some of the map, so like some of the districts and how they were drawn, do favor Republicans more. So I do expect, just because of like redistricting and stuff like that, it should help the Republicans get through, but they should be winning a lot more than 10 to 15 seats, which is kind of like the range I'm expecting right now.
Makes sense. All right, so anything else to gear us up for election season, Sean? I mean, I think that was a very good analysis of a lot of the things we care the most about. Anything else we need to know kind of gearing up? And we're going to be touching base with you regularly throughout this season. So that kind of got me oriented. Now I understand better what's going on, but anything else everybody else should know? I kind of got a good primer. I kind of know what we're watching for. I know what you're watching for. I'm kind of ready for the election season. Anything else you want to add before we kind of fade out for tonight?
Just again, I'm just going to reiterate, just keep an eye on Biden's approval rating. If it continues to go up, that could definitely help the Democrats more. If it goes back down, I mean, it could definitely help the Republicans. And then also, too, keep an eye on the congressional ballot. Right now, it's basically even, like it's basically a tie.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's basically, I mean, if it stays that way going into next week, I feel like next week is when we're going to have like a clearer picture, because Labor Day's over. Now people are starting to tune into the elections. This is the time when people start to engage, and usually it's around this time when races break. And usually in these midterm elections, races break heavily towards one side or another.
Right.
If there is a wave election coming. So if you want to know if there's a wave coming, look at those congressional ballots next week and see who's leading and who's trailing those races, because I think that'll be just as much of a sign as the way this election is going. So definitely keep an eye on those congressional preference polls as to who's winning between the generic Democrat or generic Republican. Because I think next week, I think those are probably accurate.
Makes sense.
Reflections of where we are.
Makes sense. So we are, and I'm going to talk to you offline as soon as I wrap up the show, because I got an idea I want to run by you, and then we'll schedule the next date for you to come on, which won't be long from now, and we'll discuss more of this. So and by the way, congratulations on the launch of the Political Action Bracken. You know I've been an advocate of that for a long time. As you post videos, you post content, I will obviously, even if we're not on the air together, I will forward your videos and content to the Logic and Larry audience and kind of get that out there to them for regular updates. Because I told you, like during the presidential election, I'm on a group chat with just friends, and they're like, get Bracken on here. Where is he? I need to know what's going on in this state or that state. So they're going to be interested regardless. We'll schedule the next date. And, man, I just really appreciate you coming back on and bringing your A game as usual and kind of orienting me, getting me ready for the season, and all my listeners. It's very appreciated, man.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you for the compliments as well for this project for getting underway. So I really appreciate it, and you encouraged me to do it, and I was happy to run with it, and I'm hoping for some big success out of it.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, and we will help facilitate that success as best we can too, man. And I'm looking forward to working with you this whole election season and beyond, brother. And I'll talk to you very soon, man. Thanks for coming on.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, Sean, talk to you soon. Later, brother.
All right, later, bye-bye.
So another excellent appearance by Sean Political Action Bracken. That's just him, man. That's just what he does, and I didn't even know, to be honest with you, all the things he was like. I haven't been paying attention as much, and so he gets me oriented, and it's helpful, and it really gets us all oriented. Let's hope for a good midterm season, man. Here's to another quasi season. Should I call it a season? What are we doing on Logic and Larry? Is it a seasons? Do I go in seasons? Do I go in sporadic, vehement spurts of good content and then vanish from your life? What is it that I do? Whatever I do, it's a pleasure doing it with you. And tonight, because it's getting late, I got to get up early for this football game. I'm not going to take any additional calls, but September 23rd, 2 weeks from now, I will be back. I will be back September 23rd with you live. We will discuss the news and the politics of the day. Maybe I'll have a guest. I don't know. I may just clear out September 23rd for phone calls from all of you who are part of the Logic and Larry family. I'm just happy I'm back with you guys. I'm happy I'm talking to you guys and we're back together. I'm never going away. So unless you stop listening, I'm going to be here. I might take some time off, but I will be here. So I am very happy to be back with you discussing the news of the day. I'm happy I could bring somebody like Sean Political Action Bracken on the show to get us all geared up for midterm season. Happy football season, by the way. Football this weekend, the NFL, college. Happy football season. Happy fall. Happy autumn. I will be in contact with all of you. I'll be sharing Sean's content. I'll send you the link for his page. I hope you enjoyed the simulcast. I hope you enjoyed the new interface. I hope you enjoyed the whole presentation and the soundtrack. I will be back with you soon. I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. I hope you are staying close to those close to you. And I will talk to you very, very, very soon. Logic and Larry is available on every major platform: Spotify, Apple, Audible, Amazon, Stitcher. Tune in. Tell a friend. Get involved. The logic continues. The objectivity continues. We continue this movement. And I will talk to all of you in 2 weeks. Many of you sooner than that on our individual DMs, texts, and phone calls and hangouts. And until then, good night from Newark, New Jersey. Signing off.